Last year, Kingdom Death asked me to paint a box art for them. What you're seeing is the final result. But here's the catch. I only had a few weeks to finish all 3 of them, so they could appear in print. And that kind of pressure made me realize what actually works and what doesn't. So in this video, I'll share 5 tips that level up your miniatures, which you can use in your next project. I'll explain all the tips as we paint this model, and we start with the visual hierarchy. To make this as relatable as possible, let me ask you a question. When you're painting a space marine, what do you care about the most? Well, whenever I am painting a space marine, I mostly care about the power armor, and perhaps the weapons, not necessarily leather pouch number 3 or other accessories. With these red witches, it's exactly the same, and there is a clear hierarchy of what is important and what really isn't. This comes down to the themes, and in this case, what are we looking at really? We have attractive women in red cloaks, yes, this is a woman by the way, and they are using blood magic. So the themes are the color red, blood, and also, let's say, appreciation of human body. Now, what does that mean for us? Whatever we do on these models, we wanna spotlight these features, and everything else is kinda secondary. That doesn't mean that I can straight up disregard the other things, of course. These models are featured in the official rulebook for Kingdom Death, so everything has to be good. But the skin, the blood, and the red cloaks have to be near perfect. In your own project, however, I would still consider which parts are important and which are not. Perhaps you can make a list of the themes that your piece represents. For example, in this diorama, I wanted a grimdark atmosphere with a horde of space crusaders. So I painted that, and no one really cares that some accessories are barely painted. I mentioned that in this project, the skin is one of the most important features, so I've started with that. It's the best to start with the most important features, or the ones which are the most difficult to reach. This is such a large space that it makes sense to use an airbrush. However, to get rid of that typical airbrushed look, I also applied darker filters from the sides. Just airbrushing is not enough though, and way later I also had to do some touch-ups with my paintbrush, or it wouldn't look good. Like, for example, the face in particular can't be painted with airbrush only. Now, to bring it back to visual hierarchy and investing your time wisely, you might have considered treating the base as an afterthought. You'll see with tip number 5 that it really doesn't have to be. But until then, let's talk about limited color palette. I gotta be real with you, this is not really my idea. When you look at the artwork for these miniatures, the color palette is already fairly limited. So, you know, if you're painting minis for a company, of course you have to paint them according to their wishes, and using the same colors is one of them. By the way, that's also why I painted the skin to be kinda generic. Otherwise, I would make it much more saturated. Anyway, you wouldn't believe how much time and thinking it'll save you when you don't have to consider the colors. Again, the colors here are used to spotlight the themes. And what is the main theme here? Oh, it's blood! What a surprise! To be fair, there is a bit of gold, which is yellow of course, but it's such a small feature, it barely matters. In the past, I've told you that you should pick 2 prominent colors and fill the rest with neutral colors. Well, what if I told you that you can limit your palette even further and go to the extreme with just 1 prominent color? This won't work every time, but for these, it absolutely does. These are red witches, and they don't give a shit about your fancy color theory. Color wheel? Get out of here! Red is the only color that matters. They literally have red in the name, and red they should be. But yeah, limiting your color palette will make the painting feel more harmonized, less overwhelming, and also save you the brain power. Either pick 1 or 2 prominent colors and fill the rest with neutrals. But now you might be wondering, how do you make a nice and saturated red color? You might say Chimera, the red, Or you might say artist range colors. Well, I say both are wrong. To get the best saturation possible, I recommend a tool that'll make you straight up dangerous painter. Fluo Paints. If there is anything close to a silver bullet for saturation, this is it. I've used specifically Fluo Yellow and Magenta to mix my own Fluo Red. This layer applied to the cloak will make it as punchy as possible. I don't want to use Fluo Paints everywhere, but if I want to bring something to your attention, Fluo Paints are unmatched. You know how some colors are considered to be primary? Well, by definition, for them to be primary, you would be able to mix colors like this. But that is simply not possible. You really can't get any more saturated paints than Fluo. They are special in that regard. So while I do encourage to look at artist brands and all that, adding Fluo paints into your standard ones will make them much more vibrant. In this case, I am using them to enhance the cloak and make it really stand out, especially around her head. However, they are also excellent to boost saturation for any glow effects. In particular, I've also used them for the candle of this Erza of the High model. It really makes the light source pop, and this simply isn't achievable with any regular hobby paint. Oh yeah, this model is in fact also from Kingdom Death, which happens to be today's sponsor. You guys already know I love Kingdom Death. You might have seen many miniatures from them on this channel, like this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, and finally, these ones. These red witches are part of their recent expansion for the core game, so aside from getting these awesome models, you get more gaming content. If you are not familiar with Kingdom Death, it's like a combination of D&D, Dark Souls, and Animal Crossing in a board game. It sounds weird, but it's pretty much the only tabletop game I've been playing lately. So whether you're in it for the miniatures or the game itself, check out their website and see for yourself. There is a link in the description. And thank you Kingdom Death for sponsoring this video and giving me the opportunity to forever immortalize these models in your rulebook. Coming back to our models, there is another thing you can do to level up your painting. I've already talked about the visual hierarchy and prioritizing the themes and the focal points. If you want to bring the viewer's attention to any particular thing, you can make that thing brighter or more saturated, just like we did for the top of the cloak with Fluo Paint. These, however, are just features of colors, but you can also introduce another type of contrast when it comes to rendering. If the rendering or finish is exactly the same on every surface, there is no variety, aka no contrast. And when we talk about contrast, we usually mean how dark and light things are. This, however, is just one type of contrast. By rendering different materials in a different way, you achieve contrast in textures. For example, I've used airbrush for the skin to make it super soft and smooth, but very rough brushstrokes for the stone face. And for example, there are very sharp reflections on the blood to make it feel glossy. I think it's especially obvious when you compare the leather straps and other textured materials to the skin, as it makes it feel even more smooth in comparison. And mind you, painting these parts without any texture at all was a viable option. It would be just a base coat and a few layers on top. And I would save some time if I did that. But to introduce another type of contrast, it was worth painting that texture. Now, since we've already mentioned this stone face, let's talk bases. I don't want to tell you that bases matter. You all already know that. But to give you a quick, actionable tip that you can use right away, I'm gonna propose something that some of you will consider ridiculous. Just buy pre-made bases. If you actually love creating bases, then this tip is probably not for you. But if you want to level up your models, don't want to spend much time thinking about the base, and still don't want to treat it as an afterthought, this is an excellent solution. The base I'm painting at the moment already came in with the miniature. Miniatures that come in with their own scenic bases are some of my favorite. But what if your miniatures don't come with their own scenic bases? Well, you can do the following. Get pre-made bases from the manufacturers. There are many available online, and I'm sure that you can find them. If you are a proud 3D printer owner, you can also print your own bases. It's the same thing. And if you want more custom solution, you can 3D print some bits that make it easy to not think about basing later. Of course, this is not supposed to make the bases neglected. Rather, it should give you a head start so you don't have to think about them later. Actually, this is another reason why I love Kingdom Death Minis so much. Many of the miniatures feature their own scenic bases, so you don't have to think about them and you can start painting them right away. Again, this doesn't mean you should neglect them. Even here, you can see that I'm adding some details to make the base even better. For example, these are tiny translucent beads in various colors. I don't even know if you remember at this point, but I've used them for this jewel diorama to enhance the slime. The usage here is pretty similar, but I'm using red and pink ones instead to represent bubbles in the blood. Alright, that's everything covered. But here's the kicker. It's all worthless if you don't put time into your painting. To prove it, I painted the same model twice, once in 30 minutes and once in 30 hours. And the gap is bigger than you would expect. So just click over here and see for yourself. And see you there.